World First Aid Day took place over the weekend on Saturday. Although first aid is nothing new, what many people don't realize is that first aid isn't the same for one and all. A lot depends on the age of the injured individual, and this morning we're going to talk about a group that's more vulnerable to injury than others, and that's the elderly. Ambrose Lee, senior instructor from Singapore Red Cross Academy, joins us with tips. Morning, Ambrose. Thanks for joining us and being here with us in the studio. Now, what's the key focus in first aid for the elderly?
All right. So basically, Singapore Red Cross offers basic first aid for the caregiver course to enable laypersons or even healthcare providers to provide care, timely care and emergency help to the patients who go into common illnesses and injuries.
So what are the kind of common things that we're talking about here?
Right, so the common injuries we talk about could be falls that will result in fractures, and the fractures could lead to a case of a hip fracture, pelvic fracture, head injuries. So these are more of the falls and common injuries. But for illnesses, we are talking about like chronic respiratory problems, can be asthmatic attack or even to stroke, and that's where you have the mental conditions, whereby we also have depression or dementia.
Now, we had some news this morning that the haze in Singapore has sort of gone past the 100 level. It's now like 111, as we were reporting earlier. Yes. That's something that would be a concern for the elderly, isn't it? It
would actually trigger off maybe asthmatic attacks for the patients who actually have easy allergy to these respiratory disorders.
Well, as far as illnesses go, early detection really is the key to kind of helping and responding in time. Tell us about some of the signs we should be looking for.
All right, so preventive first aid is very important, and at home everyone actually can take note of all this. And of course, with courses that you actually may attend at the first aid with the Red Cross, we can actually train the providers timely care. So one of them would be, like example, stroke. So that's where we can identify a patient using a FAST test.
Okay, and you actually have a volunteer with you to demonstrate how this FAST technique goes. Let's bring her in. Come on in. And who do we have here?
Right. We have Siti.
Siti, okay, welcome. Okay, so go ahead and demonstrate how it works.
Okay, so Siti here actually suffers a stroke, but the thing is, initially as a caregiver, most people were not able to identify until they actually understand what are they looking out for. So in this case, we have Siti with her face slightly drooping down. And I asked her, Siti, are you okay? She actually has some difficulty answering me at this point in time. So in terms of situation, I will actually go by a FAST test. So right now I go, Siti, are you able to smile for me? Right, she's having difficulty smiling, so there's some weakness on one side of the face. So it's also slightly drooping. Now next thing I'll go my A, which is arms. Right, Siti, can you raise both arms for me? Okay, so one arm is able to raise while the other having some difficulty as well. So next thing I will identify by asking her to speak, which is as speech. Right, Siti, are you able to speak and say, it's a beautiful day? Okay, so there's some murmuring and slurred speech heard from her, and that's where I realized FAS is performed and T is time, which is to call the ambulance at 995 so that we can actually get the ambulance to arrive immediately.
So the first thing to do is call up first before performing any first aid?
No, we actually do the first aid, which is the face, arms, speech, and time.
Okay.
Yes, this will help to actually identify she actually may suffer from transient ischemic stroke, right? Because these signs are usually often occurs less than 24 hours, and you can see it happening. So that's where we will actually identify this and immediately send to the hospital for medical attention.
So in between the time when you've done this technique and
the golden hour.
Yeah, well you've done this technique and you've got the ambulance on its way, what's the best thing you can do? What can the caregivers do for the patient?
At this point in time, what they can do is to actually make her feel comfortable, reassure her that ambulance on the way. Right? She may suffer from blurred vision, so you do not want to confuse her, neither do you want to make her more anxiety sets in.
Should they lie down?
No, just leave them as they are first.
Okay.
Right? Unless they start to become unconscious, then you place them on the floor, turning to recovery. Unless they are not breathing and still unconscious, then you have to perform CPR.
Are there any cases where they would have seizures or anything like that?
Right, there may be a complication because there's a blood clot in the brain or could be a rupture to the brain, and they may start to throw medical fits. And this is where you have seizures performing, and that's where they'll throw the fits itself. And that's where we will still want to do an action is to cushion the head very importantly.
Okay. In that case, I've read that you also want to kind of lean them forward so they don't choke on their own tongue. Is that true? Have you heard that?
It's a very rare cases that patients will actually bite on their own tongue.
Okay.
So often we just need to clear the airway, allowing all the vomiters and all the foams, all these to actually flow out if necessary.
Okay, now prevention for sort of illnesses and accidents is obviously the best way. And what do you tell caregivers to do, like, in order to prepare the environments or the homes that elderly people may live in?
Right. So basically what preventive first aid is all about is to actually encourage our caregivers to take note. Example, at home, your furnitures, right? Make sure you have open space so that the elderly patients, all these can walk easily. And let's say they can install non-sleep mats in the toilets, because often elderly will sleep and fall in the toilets and without knowing.
You mean like when they're having a shower, that sort of thing?
Shower, or just going to the washroom just for, you know, just for those small leaks.
Okay.
What about, as far as, we're talking a lot about physical situations, but what about psychological support?
All right, so in terms of psychological support, if we talk about the patients with mental conditions, right, so that's where dementia can be one of the cases that will lead to depression for the elderly, because activities they do, right, the lack of social cohesion, they actually may not be with the community, they choose to withdraw themselves, or they at times were supposed to like go to places they are familiar, but they somehow get lost in these familiar spaces, and they also tend to take a longer time to go home. So often these are signs of a dementia already, and when they actually have this dementia, some of them may feel frustrated. Example, if you're asking them, why are you so forgetful, and do you know, didn't I tell you? These type of situations will actually make them frustrated, which will lead to a depression. While the caregiver, on the end of the caregiver, because they are actually rather physically demanding to actually help to like caregive this elderly, and it also be emotionally and mentally stressful for them. So often I would advise the caregivers to actually go for some professional help, to actually talk to some professionals, to actually talk to them, see how they can relieve some of the stress and how to cope and manage the stress.
Give us an idea of how sort of mentally and physically draining it is for a caregiver.
Because it's the day-to-day activities, the daily operations that you have to take care of an elderly who actually can be just, even as a fracture, you have to take care of them, and because their bones are brittle, as I mentioned earlier. So often you have to support them physically, and the amount of stress would suffer can be a short duration to a period of even a year or so. So the caregivers, I already say, they really need a lot of patience to actually cope with this dementia and living with dementia patients.
Yeah, certainly caregivers need care as well.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah,
yes.
exactly.
So often I would encourage the caregivers to actually speak to professionals, that's one. Otherwise, they could actually speak or even take time off when they need help, be proactive to seek help from their own friends, such that the family members, if they can't cope with the amount of physical demands that is required from the caregiving, they should actually talk to their own family members first.
Okay.
Not an easy job. Anyway, thank you very much indeed for that, Ambrose. That was Ambrose Lee, Senior Instructor from Singapore Red Cross Academy, talking to us about first aid for the elderly. And in conjunction with World First Aid Day, the Singapore Red Cross has organised a series of public talks on the 28th of September. For more information, call the number that's on your screen right now.